Some things aren't meant to scale. The idea is not to compete. The idea is to maximize the potential of what I'm doing with doing it tastefully and not hurting the brand in the process.
Oh my goodness. Now, okay. Me and Moose have had these types of conversations for a while of to scale or not to scale, right? There's certain models that we have that are very scalable if done right. And then there's others that's like super custom that is like, how do you scale? And can it be successful if you can't scale? Like, how much of a lifespan does it really have? How long can you do it? And so I saw a really dope interview with the owner of Kith, which is Ronnie. I don't want to mess up his last name, but Fieg, however you pronounce that. Y'all know I'm bad with last names. And he said something that is conversation worthy. So let's get to it.
It was never even meant to happen. So now that it did happen, it's like, this is still my baby and it's still meant to keep special. And it's not, some things aren't meant to scale. Some things aren't meant to scale. The idea is not to compete. The idea is to maximize the potential of what I'm doing with doing it tastefully and not hurting the brand in the process.
Moose.
Yeah. And it's funny. I just started looking some stuff up because I wanted to confirm my thought before I go into it, because I love this. Like, from a strategy standpoint for what they're doing, I think it's phenomenal, right? Like, they understand who they're for. But the other piece of, like, that's a big battle that everybody has, because today we all equate success to scalability, right? We say, like, hey, and I've said that too, and I probably need to change my wording, because it's not just scalability, it's sustainability, right? Like, it's one thing to grow something, it's another thing to sustain it over time. And both are success, by the way. Like, those are two different definitions of success. They look entirely different, but they're both just as impressive and both are just as impactful. You get to choose which is right for you. But when we are all just working towards scale, you put yourself in a lot of trouble. Here's what I know about scale, especially for kind of like when we used to have that conversation, I want to say about 2 or 3 years ago. My question was always, how do you scale a custom experience? How do you scale a custom experience? And I was simply trying to figure out the only way this particular product would work is if it required some level of a hands-on approach or a tailored approach specific to the individual. There wasn't a one-size-fits-all type answer. Like, you can try to mold it and bend it, but it just wouldn't be as effective. So I was always asking that question. The mistake that we made in the process, especially as I look back on it now, we were still trying to reach millions, and we kept our price points low, knowing that it required a tailored approach. So it's like, imagine tailored suits were the same price of something that you got off the rack. Then there's nothing special about the tailored suit, and eventually that goes out of style, although it is the superior product. So that's where I think a lot of us need to look at price point when we're thinking about to scale or not to scale. Like, what is the price point that suits your brand well? And what is the price point that allows you to serve your demographic to the highest end? But for you to water down your product to deliver what is considered a cheap price to the marketplace, you didn't do your customers a favor at that point. You did yourself an injustice, right? Like, you did yourself a disservice, because I have an awesome product, or And I'm not just like, it's not like an optimistic thing, like, oh yeah, no, like words of affirmation about your product so it can become that. I was like, if you really have what we're calling the Kith brand, luxury brand, or even a tailored suit, just off of that example, if you now take that same experience and sell it at the Dollar Tree, right, then you've just watered down your product and have done a disservice for your customers. So I don't know, business standpoint, I definitely see that price point is critical when asking yourself that question. Do I scale or do I not scale? The other end of the story, or the other side of that explanation, is you should scale when your product isn't impacted by adjustment of price to appeal to the masses.
Right.
All right, because that essentially is the thing. It's like certain products don't scale, well, within reason, of course, because like I think of like Louis Vuitton. I don't know why that just came to my mind, and their bags could be like a couple $1,000s, but it seemed like everybody got them. So within reason, but for the most part, I think of, especially as a startup brand or a startup entrepreneur, you got to imagine that your product has to be unique enough and can also be sold at a price point where it's convincing for everyone to at least say, heck, I'm gonna try it, or this is dope, I want this, right? And then they get to that point where they don't even look at the price tag because you have that buy-in with them. Like you have enough brand, which I'm always fascinated by. It's like another conversation we might need to have, is it brand or product? Like superior brand or superior product, you know, because it's like you need a good product, but at some point the brand far exceeds the product. Like people buy the product. Yeah. It's the brand.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, Supreme could sell anything at a certain point. When at their highest, they sold a brick. And it
Crazy.
Sold out. It was tight. But let me give a little background of Kith, which, funny enough, their slogan is just us, right? So for people who may know the definition of like Kith, it goes from like, what was it? Kith and kin is like one's friends and acquaintances. So already right there, my man is telling you, I don't care about the masses. It's not my thing. So it was birthed in 2007, and they are known for like their collaborations and limited drops. So they worked with everybody from Nike to Adidas, all the way to Versace, okay, with the Medusa head. And that's a big deal, right? Super big deal. But the thing that's really unique about Kith is they don't do wholesale. And so for those who don't know what that means, is you can't find Kith anywhere else besides their locations. And so even though their locations are now a little bit wider than what they used to be, as far as they're in Soho, they're in Brooklyn, but they're everything from like LA to like Tokyo. So they're out there, but you can't find them anywhere else besides in Kith. Now, I said limited drops, which makes it understandable why maybe their worth, from what I looked up, can be from between 9 to 11 million. For somebody who's saying, yo, I'm not trying to scale, that's a good amount. Super good amount. And of course, people are trying to acquire. People are trying to hey, let me get that off you. Feel me? Let me get that off you. However, even with when I look at building deeper than the brand and stuff like that, and how I even move with my own personal brand, it's like I look at this model and I'm like so inspired.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, okay, so the goal isn't always to scale. The goal, like you can still make a guap of money if done strategically. If done in a way where you're not always out there. And we've spoken about it too. You have like two different types of brands. Like you have available all the time or super exclusive and limited. Like and you make money regardless because there's people who are going to need you all the time, right? There's going to be people who need a coat from Burlington, you know, but then they're going to need a coat and pay the money for a Versace one, for a Gucci one. Both are making a good amount of money. So I think it's whatever you want to do based off your values, based off how you want, how you want to run things. Like, I looked at that and I had to add it to the podcast because I'm like, okay, Moose has been big. We've been big on the whole scale. If you can't scale, and I'm like, okay, but I like my little close stuff. I like reaching the community. Like I like catering to only these people, right? And then you look at like a Supreme and even Kith, where you can collaborate to get maybe outside of your community a little bit, right? But still stay true to I'm not out there to everybody. This is going to be limited, short quality, boom, we're good.
Yeah.
I like it. I like it a lot. I like that we have options. I like that you can still make millions and not feel bad. Like it's
100%.
Right. But is it still wise? Not wise. That's not what I'm looking for. But to you, would it be strategic to have scalability in one pocket and the option to not scale in another pocket?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I just think what's making me look at it differently, especially when you define the name, it's probably a decision that was made at its inception. Like when they built it, they already had this mapped out as to, we're not necessarily interested in being, the next Off-White. Like we want to be just that, just for us. Right. So it's making me kind of almost like challenge myself and challenge those who are listening. Like, can you make such a commitment and stay disciplined to that? From the minute you start something, to say, this is what it's going to be, this is who it's going to be for, and we're going to stick to that 15 years later. That's still a sizable run, right? And we're not saying that they're, ending anytime soon, but that's a nice run. So but to answer your question, I do think that it is possible and it's probably even recommended because, man, I forgot who I was speaking with this about. I feel like I have all these types of conversations with you, so it probably was you, but it's like we were talking about how different car companies, they create other brands with a new name to tailor to a different market, right? So let's say, for example, Lexus. Well, Lexus is already the premium. Let's just, in this example, call it the non-scalable option. Well, they're like, well, not everyone can afford a Lexus.
Yes.
Let's start Toyota. Yes. That'll be scalable. It'll be a little bit more affordable for everybody else, and we can give it to the masses. So I'm not going to allow it to water down my premium product. I'm going to differentiate it by giving it a new name, its own thing. But it does allow me to keep something more scalable along the line, because from a business standpoint, it is sound, right? Like scalability is something that is a sound business move. So you don't want to kind of avoid or miss out on a sound business practice because you've committed to one thing. I think if you have the resources and the bandwidth it's always smart to do it. But if you do it, or should you choose to do it, you gotta differentiate and not tie it to the premium product, because then they're gonna be like, well, what's the difference? Like, why would I keep buying Lexus if I could now buy a Toyota at, you know, a fraction of the cost? So you got to differentiate for sure when you make that move.
These are facts. These are facts. And also, talking about names, just super random tip, because I'm even on this right now. You don't have to name, you find a name for your brand, don't name it everything that, you know? Like, let's make up a random brand. Okay, so like, shout out to Notion, right? Let's say if they said Notion, and then Notion books, Notion hats, Notion cars, Notion printers, Notion, like, it's different audiences, right? So you don't want to water down your brand's name. So like, even with us, like, we're going to do Deeper Than the Brand presents the next thing. Deeper Than the Brand presents the next thing. Because we're trying to cater to those particular audiences and not confuse what the main brand is. And that's that for anybody who's in that whole naming convention of like, okay, I'm just going to name it this gear and this everything else. Like, nah, just try to find new names. Give your new idea its own lane. You know, little small tip.